Sean McDaniel, creator of the Dog's Way DVD training course. As you're checking out the site, you've probably learned a little bit about the course, what's in the course and what's not in the course, who it's for and who it's not for. If you haven't gathered that info yet, by the way, you might want to check out the videos that are right up there and get those details. But if you've done that already, you've probably determined that the course is pretty comprehensive, and other details like we don't use food treats as a primary training tool for dogs over 7 months old, and that you get to see real people training their real untrained dogs throughout the course. But a lot of times, folks that have gathered all that information still ask, so what's the training really like? What's so great about learning all this stuff? And how is learning more information in the course gonna get me better results in training my dog? Well, to answer that, by way of example, I thought I'd go over a little practical training issue to show how we approach stuff and how learning a little bit more about how your dog interprets what you do can make your training results more efficient. The issue we'll go over today is one of the top 5 issues that clients list when they come to us. That is your dog jumping up on people that your dog meets. For those of you that are still working on this behavior, you've likely been told a couple of things about how to remedy it. The first technique you read about in dog training books is often the turn your back technique, where you just direct the person to turn around when your dog starts jumping on them. This technique is inherently a little problematic, by the way. If your dog weighs 60 or 70 pounds or more, it's not the most comfortable experience in the world to have a 100-pound Rottweiler jumping all over your back over and over again, hoping that they eventually get the message. The second technique that you're taught is usually the famous off command. Now, that off command can take many forms. Some trainers tell you to say down or no jump or just no when your dog starts jumping up on you or someone else. Regardless of the word, though, it's some command that means stop jumping. Now, the gray area in all of this is that with some dogs, those techniques actually work, meaning it extinguishes the behavior and they just don't jump on people anymore. In the vast majority of dogs, though, it doesn't work very effectively, but owners, to their credit, keep practicing those techniques and diligently, tirelessly, responsibly work on this behavior for months and sometimes years. So, why do these techniques work with some dogs and not with most dogs? Well, I'm glad you asked. To start to answer that question, I have to throw a little theory information at you first. So, here we go. When dogs communicate with each other, they communicate in an escalation of communication. First posture, then vocalization, and then physical contact. The more important the message, the higher up those steps they go. Now, I'm not telling you something that you don't already know intuitively. It's actually why you're afraid of a dog that's communicating a serious message towards you. If a dog, upon seeing you, stops, tightens up all their muscles, and stares directly at you, posture, you might get a little nervous. But if you don't get the message and you continue moving towards them, they move up a step in the communication and growl, vocalization. The reason you get more concerned when that happens is that you intuitively understand the escalation of posture, vocalization, and physical contact. You intuitively know that the next step in this little scenario is likely physical contact. So, let me give you an additional piece of theory here. Well-socialized dogs communicate with each other, again, using a principle that I call minimum threshold of effective communication. The minimum mixture of posture, vocalization, and physical contact that it takes to make the point. So, knowing these theory pieces, now we can start to break down why some dogs respond to the turn your back technique. If their minimum threshold is very low relative to that behavior and that person, when the person turns their back, that is, gives them the postural message, that message carries enough weight, they've reached the dog's minimum threshold of effective communication, and voila, the dog changes its behavior. In my experience, though, that result happens with that technique in only about 1 in 20 dogs. Many trainers actually understand the ineffectiveness of this technique, and that's why the most common technique that's taught is the off command. From our theory of posture, vocalization, and physical contact, when you say off, you've moved up a step in the escalation of communication and you've made it more important. So, some greater number of dogs respond to that vocalization and don't jump anymore. In my experience, that's somewhere around an additional 2 out of 20 dogs, for which that technique extinguishes the behavior and they just don't jump anymore. So why doesn't the off command do the trick with most dogs? After all, dogs understand human words and commands. Why can't they understand this one? Again, another good question. The answer has to do with how your dog interprets verbal commands. For some reason, most dogs take verbal commands from us as what we call temporary rules. What I mean by that is, if you teach your dog the command sit, that is, you say sit and your dog just consistently plants a sit, you don't get body language from your dog that says, oh no, they caught me not sitting. I'm supposed to never not sit and they caught me not sitting. They just take that verbal sit command as a temporary rule, meaning their understanding is, hey, you can hang out, do whatever you want, chew on a stick, lie down, and when I need you to sit, I'll just say the command for the temporary rule called sit. So if we take that theory to interpret the dog's understanding of your off command, you can start to see how your dog interprets the command and what they understand the general rule to be. You often see evidence of your dog's understanding of this rule when people visit you. Person number one comes through the front door, your dog runs over and jumps up on them to say hi. You say off, and your dog stops jumping on them, which I suppose is more refined than your dog totally ignoring you, but it is still taken as a temporary rule by your dog. How do we know that? Well, visitor number two shows up a few minutes later, and your dog runs over, jumps up on them to say hi. You say off, and your dog stops jumping on them. And then person number three shows up, and so on and so on. You end up working really hard on the off command for years, and your dog never really stops jumping all that consistently. So, what's the solution? Well, with us in the Dogs Way DVD training course, we first always start working on clarifying the relationship. But early on in training, when we deal with the jumping up behavior, we recommend to let your dog drag the leash around for your early training period while the dog's hanging around the house with you. For this front door scenario that we were just discussing, when someone visits, escort them over to the door, holding the loose leash, then let them begin the jumping behavior. Don't say anything to them and actually ignore them. So that ignoring element of the back turning technique we can actually use, we just have to upgrade the communication quite a bit for most dogs. And then we quickly pop the leash to the side each time the dog jumps up. Do this consistently and your dog begins problem solving that jumping up just isn't as fun and useful as it used to be. As you'll learn in lesson 1, we use the leash as a communications tool and not a physical control tool. So we don't want to pull the dog off of the person. That doesn't create the opportunity for your dog to learn to change their own behavior. We just want to pop to the side to interrupt that jumping behavior with a small piece of negative stimuli and let the dog start to decide to change their own behavior. Once your dog is back on the floor, instruct your visitor to give your dog a little pet and then stop petting them and ignore your dog again. You can praise them too if they stay on the floor. Fairly soon after starting this, you'll start to see your dog mentally work through this issue. As they greet people at the front door, you'll see that very beginning posture of getting ready to jump, their old ritual, loading up some tension on the back legs as they wag their tail and look up at the person. But after 2 or 3 dozen trials at this new greeting ritual, you'll start to see them opt not to jump, in which case you will verbally praise them. By the way, one of the other techniques that you may have been told by other trainers to use to solve this jumping behavior is giving your dog a verbal obedience command when meeting people at the front door. That is, your dog runs over to the door, you know they're going to jump, and you say sit, or perhaps a preemptive no jump. Now, this is okay to practice your sit under distraction, but it doesn't actually ever deal with the jumping behavior. Many trainers teach this preemptive command technique because, frankly, they've observed that the back turning and the off command techniques don't work very frequently. The only challenge with this preemptive technique, by the way, is the default policy that it sets up. It tells your dog that it's the human's responsibility to catch them before they jump up and put them in a sit or remind them not to jump up. The default rule that this technique creates is a rule that says if the human doesn't do that, that is, give the verbal command, then jumping is still fair game. You still run into the temporary rule problem, and your dog never sees it as their responsibility to stop themselves from jumping. Now, there is a little more nuance and info in this lesson, and we have more time to go through it in the course itself, but I wanted to give you an idea about how learning more about how your dog thinks about what you do and say sometimes allows you to teach your dog how you'd like them to act much more efficiently. If you ultimately decide that the course is a fit for you, then I'll see you in the course. Until then, thanks for your time.